Welcome to episode 7 of the Think Tank podcast, brought to you by the Digital Innovation Group at Providence Health. Think Tank is a supercharged brainstorming session between two leaders from different verticals to help us solve some of healthcare's biggest challenges. This is Kelly Stonelake. Thank you for joining us. Today, we will be discussing how we build centers of innovation in Staid industries. Joining us today is Aaron Martin, Providence Health's Chief Digital Officer, and Woody Driggs, who is Principal and Leader of Wavespace, EY's digital incubator. Welcome, Aaron and Woody, and thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Okay, so I dropped a small but mighty word on us a minute ago. Staid. The official definition of staid is respectable but unadventurous. Woof. Does it sound like I'm describing healthcare and finance?
I think they invented that word for healthcare. We're definitely, for the right reasons, respectable, especially, Lord knows during the pandemic, I think the world kind of saw what incredible heroes I'm privileged to work with every single day. And how they put their lives at risk for their fellow man. So definitely respectable and for the right reasons, not the most adventurous group of people because of, we deal with people's lives. So for very good reasons.
Yeah, and I would agree, Aaron. I think you look across the spectrum of industries from technology to healthcare to automotive, aerospace and defense, and all of them have a unique perspective on transformation and change. And where you have regulated industries and regulations, people spend a lot of time building organizations that manage risk really well, and that tends to slow things down, and including slowing down the innovation process. So, every organization has and every industry has its unique challenges when it comes to innovation, and they all need to look at it in a new and different way. Because one thing we know is everything's changing and everything's being disrupted. And 6 months ago is just an amazing example of that fact.
Well, and that's what's really interesting about this conversation is, the two of you are essentially, your full-time gig, you're at the forefront of leading organizations to drive innovation and disruption in your respective industries. Woody, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what Wavespace is?
Yeah, happy to. So Wavespace is a place where we help our clients reimagine just about anything. And that spectrum ranges on a very long and broad range of what we call exam questions. Some of those exam questions might be as simple as, how do I use new technologies to close my books faster, for example? And at the same time, we have clients that are coming in and talking about, for example, patient care or individualized cancer care treatments going forward, and the challenges around the drug supply chain when it moves from a one-to-many to a one-to-one delivery of a specific vaccine for a specific issue or challenge or tumor. And all of the challenges that come along with the changes in that supply chain. And so helping clients to think through, what are the platforms that are going to be required? What are the new business processes, business models? Where's the value going to be created in that? Is all the types of things that we would look at with a client to understand what their role in that future business model is going to look like.
And Aaron, can you tell us also a little bit about what's going on at Think Tank for those who might not have caught the last episode, and if you think it's really in line with what Woody's doing or what the differences are?
Yeah, so at the Digital Innovation Group, it's kind of it's one part operational within our health system, and so we maintain kind of the digital the digital experience that our patients and our consumers kind of experience when they work with Providence and when they are treated by Providence, and then we also build new experiences where we don't see something available in the market. And when we do build something, we build it for the express purpose of spinning it out as a separate company. We've done that. So Providence Ventures, which is another team that kind of reports into me, they primarily invest in companies that already out in the market have existing, what we call best of breed products that, we didn't already have in our portfolio of solutions after we've identified a very, very important problem. And when we can't find something out in the marketplace, we'll actually build it, create it as a product, make sure it works for us, then try to sell it to another health system to kind of revalidate the market opportunity. And then if it hits that kind of note as well, then we'll create a company out of it and spin it out. So if you look at the 18 portfolio companies within Providence Ventures, 2 of those were founded by our organization and spun out. And so we incubated them. We're actually working on a 3rd one right now that we just announced the management team for, called DexCare. So it's this kind of hybrid model of, first determine, do we already have a solution to a big priority problem in our portfolio of existing technical, existing vendors. If not, then we go to Providence Ventures. They go out and look in the marketplace to see if there's a solution out there in the market that's, doing the job. And we may or may not invest in it. And then if we don't own it, can't find it, then we'll build it. And if we build it, we'll build it for the purposes of creating a new company.
Awesome. Yes, a Digital Innovation Group. Thank you. Not the transformation of this podcast, but I mean, we can talk about that next.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just add to that. It's an interesting dichotomy there and an interesting dual role that you play, because one piece of the role is around improving the customer experience, which is essentially a productivity enhancement and or a transformation that's focused on creating a better experience for either your customer, your end customer, your employees. And that's one of the challenges that we see clients having, is they've got to make those productivity improvements and they've got to apply digital technologies to creating a better experience, because most of the time that's what's going to create a better experience, when you can give them 24/7 access or give them easy access through a mobile device or whatever it is. And then there's this completely separate agenda of building a new company, right? And those are 2 very, very different agendas. In one case, you have expectations that it's going to be successful 100% of the time, and the question is just how much benefit or better experience you're going to get. In the other, you're incubating something new, and you're taking on a significant amount of risk, and the fail fast culture has to be embedded in that process. And so those are 2 really difficult balls to juggle that I'm finding that when, especially in a Staid industry, that it's a muscle that clients now have to develop, and they're struggling a bit to develop that muscle, is what we find.
Yeah, and just to add to what Woody is saying, for us, it's been, there's several reasons why we do it this way. One is it's a force multiplier. It's a way of us getting scale in an industry that is, where, we've got 120, software engineers, mainly from, places like Amazon and Microsoft. We're based in Seattle, but that's dwarfed by the resources kind of being put to bear by the major technology organizations. And so it's not that we're trying to kind of compete. We're trying to stay relevant, right? And if you don't kind of innovate on your own behalf, the thesis is you just, you become an order taker, not, in terms of like the technology that's kind of handed to you, right? But the problem that we've also got is kind of limited resources. How do you get the most out of them? And, in a typical kind of corporate innovation, model, what happens is you create something new and novel. You have got obviously a roadmap that you want to prosecute on that new kind of product idea. But the challenge is you're constrained on resources. And so what happens is, call it 6-12 months if you're lucky down the road, priorities shift, and you don't get to kind of fulfill that roadmap. And so in this case, what we do is, because we're creating a separate company, which is super painful, to your point, Woody.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not the easiest thing in the world to do. It at least gives that team access to additional capital through additional additional customers and venture capital to kind of at least fully exploit that roadmap. So then what we do is think of us as like we kind of manufacture new companies based on need, and we build as an extreme last resort. If we see something in the market that's doing a good job, we'll just adopt that, right? Because one of the kind of pieces of math I've always explained to my counterparts in other parts of the industry is, Providence Ventures is a $300 million fund. If we double that, we'd be in the top quartile performance. But if you divide that by kind of a 10-year kind of, harvesting period, that's about $30 million of benefit a year. We have $11.5 billion in cash in our treasury, and that's a de minimis impact to us, over a 10-year period. It's really about getting that leverage. Providence Ventures is kind of a tool for getting leverage in our innovation work.
So interesting. Yeah, I'd love to, let's talk a little bit more about the model that you mentioned, Aaron, and both of you touched on this, your process for iterating on whether it's a product idea or business idea, whatever internal transformations needed. I'm really curious if we can talk a little bit about what the role of strategy is as part of an incubator. And, I come from the advertising world, so I'm thinking about things like, more along the lines of strategic planning, insights, and so forth, some of that upfront work that goes into guiding your decisions and investments, financially and other resources. Can you guys talk a little bit about what that planning process is like in both of your worlds?
Yeah, Woody, do you want to go first?
Yeah, happy to. So it's a different kind of strategy, right? Because when you think about general corporate strategy and think about how you've got to advance the company in terms of both scope, scale, and efficiency, you're thinking about the more traditional ways to manage the business, and you're thinking about the next sustaining innovation, possibly an adjacent innovation. When you start thinking about the future and disruption, your focus on strategy really has to change. It has to be about what we call, a lot of people call, a future back perspective, where instead of thinking about what your next role is and what your next product and your next strategic move is, you're thinking about what is going to happen well into the future and starting to think about the scenarios that you will play in. Where are your strengths, and where and how can you participate in the value that's going to be created well into the future? And then because we're all human as opposed to crystal ball readers, you've got to identify scenarios that you think are likely, and then you've got to start testing those scenarios. Mm. And so a future back concept is an addition to your existing strategy element that has to play on both sides of the equation of sustaining your existing business and yet being disruptive to where the business is going to head. So what we see is clients have to get better at this concept of executing in the future back and get comfortable executing in a future back scenario, and then having the both governance process and the organization to be able to test those scenarios in a way that is A, affordable, and B, customer focused, and C, able to scale. Because what we of course see is that a lot of times Staid companies have defined what the future is and yet have a hard time incubating it to the point where it becomes the next piece of their core of their business. And that's the challenge of any company that's faced with disruption, which, by the way, is all of us now. It used to be just a few companies and a few industries. Now it's all of us. And so we all have to get better at this, both future back strategy work and scenario testing, and insulating that process in a way that allows it to thrive, and then finding a way to be able to integrate back to the core.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, most recently, we've kind of shown, kind of our work more recently in terms of how we think about the strategic analysis. So I have a small team that internally, it's a digital strategy team that their role is kind of, think about it as like digital opportunity kind of target selection. And so what they do is they talk to a ton of our caregivers, a ton of our senior management across our entire organization on a continuous basis to really understand, what are the big, what we call needle moving opportunities for our organization. And then they do a ton of external interviews and research and that kind of thing, just to try to understand where the industry is moving, what's going to be important, and then what are the corresponding digital opportunities. And then they stack rank these ideas or these opportunities, and then they actually put a number against them, like, what is this worth clinically or economically if we solve the problem. And then we kind of stack rank them, and then we kind of draw, kind of what we did at Amazon, which is, we draw a line above and below the line, and things that are above the line we're going to actively explore and continue to work on and start generating MVPs against. Below the line is our backlog, and our backlog is huge. There's a ton of, massive opportunities in healthcare. And the biggest problem I've seen with, startups is they focus on stuff that's way below the line that in any other industry would be a massive opportunity. But because healthcare is so inefficient, and it's kind of deceptive to them, which is like, well, they'll come to me and they'll say, but Aaron, we did the total addressable market on this opportunity, and it's like, $700 million. And you say those words outside of healthcare and you get a VC's attention. You say it to me and I'm like, I don't get out of bed unless it's like, 10 billion. Yeah. Because we've just got such huge problems that we're dealing with. And so anyway, so the team does that analysis. And for the first time during COVID, we actually published a form of it called the Digital Insights Reports. And it's gotten a lot of really great traction. We're getting hundreds of downloads a week on it from various different industry participants, and it's all free. And the reason why we published it is, during COVID, we had actually just finished this process I was describing, and I had this kind of tough conversation with the team, and I said, look, I know you just wrapped this up, but we just got hit with a pandemic. What changed, right? And so we've got to go through and kind of go through that iteration again. They interviewed about 100 people, both inside and outside of the organization, very, very senior people, both internally and externally, and then also people who are kind of delivering care on a day-to-day basis, consumers, et cetera, and then did a ton of research and then kind of plotted out how we think COVID is going to kind of roll through the industry and how it's speeding certain things up. And the reason why we did this is to put a stake in the ground for other people to tell us, in the industry, here's what you missed, here's what you're not thinking about. And so we're getting a lot of great feedback that helps us learn. And it's something unique to healthcare. I mean, we're still on the provider side very regionally based. And so we have conversations, at least 3 to 4 conversations with other health systems a week, trading ideas and notes. And this is just a more formal way of doing it. So it's been super productive and educational for us. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback.
Yeah, let's talk more about the pandemic relative to broadly what you guys are doing, but also specifically the planning and model approach that you both take, because it's super fascinating how you both think about sizing opportunities and figuring out where your investments go and your resources go. One thing we've talked about a lot on this podcast is how COVID-19 has impacted every single thing related to obviously healthcare, but also driving digital innovation across industries. And I'm curious how the pandemic has affected those processes in terms of the amount of time you have available to you to be able to respond to the market need when the need is present. And if you're changing how you're prioritizing the work you do, or the processes with which you move forward on work, or if it's more like, okay, we see this as an indication of future state and we're proceeding kind of as normal, and we will catch up.
Yeah, so Kelly, as you said, everything changed 6 months ago, right? And imagine the business that I'm in. We were primarily in the business of bringing clients into our physical spaces where we would think differently with them, and that meant bringing together 10, 20, 30 client team members, surrounding them with experts, both internal to EY and externally, and looking at a problem from a completely different perspective and trying to generate those scenarios that Aaron was speaking about earlier. And when that all changed, we had to overnight flip that capability to be virtual. And we were able to do that because we were using technology primarily to do all the collaboration in the first place. We were using technologies like Mural collaboration tools and Miro, and we're using Microsoft Surface Hubs and other technologies to try to capture all of the collaboration that we were doing and make it more digital. And so being able to switch it over to virtual was fairly straightforward. Just add a Zoom layer or a Microsoft Teams layer or a WebEx layer, and you're off and running. And what we've seen is we've seen even more demand. And the reason is because our clients have to move these programs and projects forward, and they're seeing exactly what you talked about. Everything is changing. The digital channels are accelerating. They've probably accelerated by 5 years in 5 months. Whether it's a telehealth channel or it's a direct-to-consumer channel, or a online call center, whatever it is, if it was digital, it accelerated in a significant way. And we see that as the overly used words, the new normal, that it's likely to be here to stay. Certainly, there may be some drawback to the physical, and at the same time, people have learned how to do this. And so, I'll give you a simple example for us. We see clients completely reevaluating how many people really need to be in the office going forward and what kind of office space they need. So we have both a practice that looks at how people work in offices and how they operate, and what it means to come back safely to work. And we also have a practice that looks at real estate and optimizes your real estate portfolio. So we're putting those two things together right now and pushing that into market as a new offering to say, how do you relook at your workforce, look at all your workspaces, and reevaluate your entire real estate portfolio to be able to innovate just around that simple innovation. And that's just one of probably 100 things clients have to think about as it relates to the changes around COVID.
Yeah, one example, is illustrated by the third company that we're incubating, this, DexCare, and kind of pre-COVID, it was really, really focused around what I would call same-day care. So this, we have a retail relationship with Walgreens where we have nurse practitioner staffs, staffed in clinics, embedded in Walgreens, and then we have a on-demand telehealth capability through this platform called DexCare. And pre-COVID, that was kind of where most of the digital adoption was happening within our health system, because super convenient, easy. I want to schedule same day, or I want to be seen through telehealth and whatnot. COVID hit, and if you'd asked me a year ago, hypothetically, what are the things that would cause massive online adoption for telehealth, I would say, well, first you'd have to close down all the clinics, then you would have to make payment the same, right? And if you could do those two things, then you would probably see massive adoption of telehealth. And sure enough, the pandemic did both of those things. And so the impact is that we started lighting up all these other endpoints that consumers typically didn't want to engage in digitally. So, our primary care business, our specialty business. You can now schedule both, online, and you can also do telehealth visits, urgent care, EDs, like basically all these kind of consumer these endpoints that the patient could go be seen for something digitally were lit up in kind of 3 months. And so now the problem that DexCare is tackling is much, much more complex because now you have to navigate a patient who's expressing interest in, say, for instance, they may, have a complaint that, I may have a UTI, for instance. Before, we would see them in one place, either, in clinic or virtually, in that kind of same day care setting. Now they could be seen in, 11 or 12 places in the area. So how do you navigate them to the right venue of care to where they have the best experience? And then the other kind of technology challenge that, DexCare is creating is all right. So then how do you kind of compete? How do you measure whether or not that was a good experience, and then create a ongoing loop using machine learning that says every single time somebody with these characteristics expresses this kind of intent, I'll navigate them there because I get the best possible outcome for that patient, with assuming those clinics are in these states. And so the state could be, like, do they have availability, right? So we don't want to send somebody to a clinic who's who has no schedule of availability. When should that availability be, right? So, like, does it matter if it's same day or can it be for the next week, right? And so the complexity of what we're dealing with digitally now has kind of expanded because of this rapid adoption. And then the last thing I'll say about it is, if you'd asked me this time, last year, I was going around saying, what we should be really concerned about as an industry is getting ready for, and I think I used to say it's 12 to 18 months, we've got to be ready to serve patients digitally as soon as possible because, disruptive startups and companies like Amazon and Google, et cetera, are coming our direction and are going to disrupt our organization. Turns out it was the pandemic that did it, but they're right behind it because what's happened is we've teed up all those patients who've now experienced digital and were satisfied with it right into the hands of these disruptors who are basically, the pandemic's done their job for them, right? Of kind of driving customer adoption. And so now the urgency is even higher. So those are kind of, that's just one aspect of how the pandemic has kind of really catalyzed things in our industry.
Well, in this, I think what you set up there, Aaron, is the need, as you talked about, serving these clients up into now a digital environment where they are now comfortable being in a digital environment and they're comfortable doing telemedicine or perhaps even being monitored in their home. That does introduce all kinds of new capabilities, new services, new technologies, new requirements that we've only yet to begin to think about. And this gets back to the Staid company issue. If you are the kind of company that innovates very slowly and deploys technology more for internal enterprise capability than for example customer experience, then you've got a lot of work to do. And what we're seeing is this shift in value drivers where the real value is coming from innovation at scale. So being able to innovate very, very rapidly in the pace that you were talking about earlier, being able to deploy technology at speed, almost like a software company would deploy technology, and putting the human at the center of all that. Because if you put technology at the center of it and just say, hey, look at this great piece of technology, let's go find out what we can do with it. That's kind of 20, 30, 40 years ago what the approach was, because you got a really cool new technology once every year. Now you get them once every month or week. And you've really got to look at it from the human experience back and say, what is the job we're trying to get done? Thank you, Clayton Christensen. and how do we make that a better job, and how do we apply technologies to make that job better? So we've got to be able to innovate those experiences at scale. We've got to think about what those new experiences even look like. We've got to be able to deploy technology very, very quickly. And we've got to keep that human being at the center. Otherwise, we miss the mark, and we waste a lot of money way below the line, to your point, Aaron, working on below the line stuff, as opposed to the stuff that's really going to change the needle, above the line.
Yeah, and I would also say that it's not really even, and if you're in a staid industry, going back to the theme, chances are you're way behind. And if consumers are becoming more important to your business, I mean, the radical change that happened in healthcare is in 2008, where the Great Recession really kind of proliferated high deductible plans. And so patients were paying more out of pocket, and they're becoming less connected to a payer, and so they were out shopping, right? And so that was the first big kind of event, that kind of, started to transform healthcare is that, consumers really started to say, I'm paying for this and I'm getting really crappy service, right? It doesn't feel like all the other very expensive services that I go and I pay for. There's no self-service, like I have to call somebody, and so on. And so, I would argue that, if you're working in a staid industry, you don't have to be nearly as visionary, at least initially, as you might have to be if, right now, if you're in like retail or media or something like that, because like you're just playing catch up. I remember having a discussion 4 or 5 years ago. My team is, very, very kind of lean startup purists. They always want to see evidence around, customer demand and that kind of thing. And we had this debate about, do people want to do online scheduling in healthcare? Shouldn't we test that hypothesis? And I was like, guys, there's certain things that we should just assume are true because of how it rolled out in other industries, right? Let's not let's not worry ourselves as to whether or not people want self-service, because they're doing it in travel and everything else. And so there's certain things you don't have to go to that kind of trouble for in the staid industries that, just go look at the roadmaps other industries have taken and follow that, to some extent.
Yeah, let's talk about that more. So one thought that I had while listening to what both of you just shared is how lucky, or maybe the right word is smart, you and your organizations were to already have this practice of innovation in place in advance of something incredibly disruptive like a global pandemic happening. But I gotta imagine, we're talking about staid industries. I'm sure lots of our listeners are parts of staid industries, and predominantly healthcare most likely, but elsewhere. And I gotta imagine some of our listeners are either the person that's tasked with thinking about this, or it's like part of their job among other things, or it's just something they're interested in even though it's not their day job. And so for someone doesn't have the amount of, I'd say, organizational support and validation, but recognizes the need to innovate and disrupt their staid organization, what advice do you have in terms of what the next step is to advocate for that support? Is that even the next thing, or to deprioritize existing work streams to be able
this is like right over Woody's plate, so I'm gonna let him do this.
Well, so here's the challenge, right? Most corporations have been able to get away with what I would call productivity enhancements and sustaining innovation for a long time, right? Having to completely transform the core of their business to become something completely new and different is out of the realm of possibility for most companies. And when they did do that, they did it through acquisition.
Mm.
So they would go acquire a company and go through that really painful process of reinventing the core and integrating that back in and coming through. And that's a painful process, as everyone knows, and can be really challenging. What I suggest now is that organizations need to have and build this muscle. They need to be able to run their core business. They need to be able to improve the core business at a scale that's pretty significant, because they do have to have adjacent and sustaining innovation, and a lot of it, to make it really work. And they also have to have significant productivity improvements. They have to be applying data and analytics and insights and better customer experiences and better employee experiences. And they have to be able to incubate new businesses and do what Aaron is doing inside the organization. And you have to be able to do mergers and acquisitions. So now you have to do all four of those. And the one that companies are least, from my perspective, have the longest way to go and the biggest gap is in this idea of incubating disruptive businesses or new businesses that they're either going to spin out or are going to become the core of the business, in the long run. And so you have this real challenge of how do you manage those three portfolios, because they're very different, right? When you're running the standard business, if you're also in charge of building new businesses, it's really, really difficult to balance those two things, because running of the day-to-day business is almost always going to take priority. And also, if you start looking at your investments, these incubations, as Aaron pointed out, they're 3-year to 7-year investments that have to be funded through the whole thing. You've got to stay with it and stick with it. Otherwise, if you use the standard yearly investment cycle to manage this, you'll kill those investments halfway through the process, just because a leader changed, or because we had an investment crisis of some kind, or a pandemic that changed everything. And so you start looking at that differently. So what I suggest, Kelly, is that organizations really have to get good at all three of these. They have to get great at running the standard business or core business. They have to be really good at improving the business and getting that next sustaining innovation in the queue and developing it. And then they need to be able to incubate the new, both through acquisition and through developing their own businesses and their own ideas. Because the acquisition strategy is getting more and more expensive, because in most cases, you're innovating around new technology or analytics, and buying a technology or analytics company is incredibly expensive in today's environment.
Yeah, I would just, one kind of specific example that I want to pick on with respect to Woody's point there was, a big part of the challenge in Staid Industries is this kind of, Stalinistic kind of 5-year planning cycles, where they basically, you have an annual budget, and then and then all the benefit for whatever investment that you do is going to have to be kind of within that same year, right? And so, for instance, right now, I'm going to our finance partners who are very innovative, and we have this opportunity that is a 6-to-1, payback. But the problem is it spans, anywhere from kind of 18 to 24 months, right? And so you have to make the investment this year to get the benefit for next year. And, and so it's almost like a capital budget thing, even though it's an expense, right? And so I hate to get so nerdy about accounting, but those types of things really matter in innovation, because, you're kind of otherwise avoiding or passing on something that's probably the best return in our health system, if we can kind of just get the investments to kind of play out. And then the other thing I would also say, just to add to kind of, a lot of the great thoughts that Woody just had or just kind of expressed is, in healthcare on the provider side, we're very regional, right? And so we don't really compete against each other. There's like 200 major health systems in the United States, I think. And we've met with 150 over the past 18 months, and we do half-day meetings with them. And so going back to your kind of the lonely individual who's kind of, at a health system, for instance, early on, I met a lot of them. And a lot of the ways that they basically convince their senior management that this is important is to kind of come talk to us. And what we can show them is, here's the reason why we're doing digital. Because there's two kind of biases. One is, I've got a lot of stuff on my plate. This digital thing, is it really going to matter? bias, number one, and number two is we're a tens, if not hundreds of year old organization. Can we really get it to happen, right? And so what we do is we explain to them why we're doing this. We believe this is an existential threat to our organization, because just doing the math, we take our profitable part of the business are commercial patients, right? They are, then you've got Medicare and Medicaid where we break even and lose money on, in those two areas. The commercial patients pay for our mission. Those commercial patients also happen to be highly digitally adopted, right? So everybody on this phone is a commercial patient. You all have private insurance, so you all are using kind of digital. And if they go somewhere else, we die, right, as an organization. So the math is pretty easy and the argument's pretty easy. But when they see a major health system kind of taking that position and why we're investing in this, that helps to convince them. And then the second thing is it possible? We're a 160-year-old organization. Like, we are the oldest organization founded by women in the United States. I mean, we're very proud of that. But we were founded around the Civil War, right? And so, so that answers the second question of it is possible to do these types of transformations. So to kind of summarize, if you're out there alone, kind of howling at the wind within your organization, go and find other examples where things are, where they can make the argument against those two different biases, mm-hmm. right? Of it doesn't matter and it's not possible, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah, it's such a great example. And, I look at the Staid Industries. I was at a company the other day that had been in business for 122 years, and they had re-engineered the core of their business essentially twice in 122 years. You think about some of the new companies. I can think of a streaming company, for example, that has re-engineered its business twice in 22 years, going from mail order to streaming to now content. And so the challenge is less about, are we going to have to reinvent the core of our business and incubate something new and become that thing? It's now just a matter of how soon is it going to happen and how quickly is it going to happen to us. And for most organizations, it's going to happen every decade, and that's mind blowing to most people. And at the same time, I think with the pace of change, I think that's reasonable to assume that the core of your business is essentially going to change.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, one thing I would love to discuss as we wrap up is, the thing I'm noticing and fascinated with out of this conversation is how similar some of the challenges are in both of your industries, as well as, likely other Staid industries and folks who are tuning in, and how empowering it feels to see each of your own approaches and fingerprints on like the specific ways that you're solving the challenges for your organizations. And so I would love to just do a little fun thought exercise as we wrap up, and, also building on the theme of there are, above the line, below the line, there's so many good problems to solve where we could have so much impact. Both of you guys have more on your plate than you could ever get to in the next, calendar year. But let's just pretend that you have Aaron, you have the opportunity to tap Woody for some help on one of your biggest challenges. And Woody, you have the opportunity to tap Aaron for help on one of your biggest challenges, based on kind of each of your unique strengths and approaches that you've taken to disrupting your Staid industries that we've learned about on this call. I would just love to hear from each of you. What would be the thing you would want the other to dig into that's on your plate, and why?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think that, and I've talked about this before, part of the downside of our model, because we're out talking to, again, a wide range of our clinical and operating folks, as well as other people in industry, is our frame of reference, right? And so, I would say, do a really good job of kind of executing on priorities that are probably in the 3 to 5 year range of being kind of relevant. And so one of the things that my team gets a lot of feedback around is like, one of our vendors, one of our portfolio companies always says, you guys are about three years ahead of the rest of the market in terms of digital, right? Which is a compliment, but it also indicates that we're definitely not 10 years ahead, because that would be unsustainable, right? And that would not work. But I think, one of the things I would want to work with Woody about is like, what does that 10-year look like, right? Because like it's for us, it's and this is also probably a bit of my personality kind of inflicted on the organization. We're very focused on shipping, and it makes us very uncomfortable to do, big picture tier 3, horizon planning and that kind of thing. But the problem is if you don't at least have some awareness of where things could go, you may kind of start to paint yourself into a corner strategically of making an investment. So in other words, we're definitely not like saying, hey, wow, it would be a great idea to, we have 51 hospitals, let's build another 50, right? So we have that level of common sense about the future, but I would also argue that we're not thinking in kind of a 20-year horizon or whatnot, right? And so my question would be, are we making investments that will then become, redundant, or, like if we are, let's be intentional about it, right? And versus being surprised, right? I always tell my team is like, if you're going to do something and it's going to be long-term not valuable, but in the short 3 to 5 year term, very, very valuable, let's know that, because then we can kind of plan against it, right? Versus being surprised, right? So I think that would be one area be interesting to talk to Woody about.
Yeah, and for me, Kelly, it goes back to this idea of managing 3 portfolios or even 4 portfolios. What Aaron has demonstrated is his organization's ability to stay insulated from the business to a degree and build things that are relevant, and at the same time continue to run the core business and make sure that the business is proceeding, both from an improvement perspective as well as a growth perspective. So for me, understanding how his organization has been insulated appropriately, both from a compliance perspective as well as a legal perspective and a financial perspective, and motivated properly from a KPI perspective, because those 2 things become incredibly important when it comes to staying focused on this and having a CEO and a board that understands the importance of disruption and really focuses on it. For us, as EY, I mean, you could think about EY certainly as having accounting heritages, being a state industry as well. Now we have a consulting and a technology arm as well that drives a lot of change from that perspective. And at the same time, we're known very much as a protect brand. People think about us around internal audit and tax and assurance. And we've built a $8 billion consulting business in the last 10 years that does a lot of work in finance transformation and supply chain resilience and supply chain transformation and those things. So I would say, our brand and optimization has grown. The biggest stretch for our brand is in growth, is being known as a company that can help businesses grow. So folks like Aaron would probably think of EY somewhere down the list when it comes to a growth brand. And that's the big transformation that we have to make as a brand. And we're putting a lot of emphasis and effort right now into this idea of transformation realized and helping clients reframe their future. And so, when it comes to protecting, optimizing, and growing a business, we have to be able to help companies do all 3, all under the umbrella of transformation. And so, when it comes to thinking about how Aaron and his organization could help us think through that, that brand transformation is really crucial.
Wow, you guys both have a lot on your plates. I'm going to let you get back to it. So thank you so much for joining us today, Aaron and Woody. You've been listening to the Think Tank podcast, brought to you by the Digital Innovation Group at Providence Health. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review or follow @Prov Innovation on Twitter for more discussion about how digital can inspire solutions to some of our biggest challenges. I'm your host, Kelly Stonelake. Until next time, take care.